All right. Philosophy of the paranormal, extrasensory perception, and psychokinesis. Let's let people in. Oh, there they are. Okay. Hi, everyone. Looks like everyone's connected up to audio, so hopefully everyone can hear me.
Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. Glad it's nearly Friday. Well, today is pretty much my Friday this week for all intents and purposes, so it's been a week. But that's okay, because today we're going to talk about some cool stuff. We're going to talk about extrasensory perception and psychokinesis. So let's see, it's 2:35 now, so we'll get going with the screen share. And then we'll get right into the slides. Go. Share. And let's make this full screen. Go. So we'll learn some new things today. In addition to sort of reiterating some of the things I touched on in the first lecture, which has to do with the history of psychical research, spiritualism, and parapsychology, and also a little bit of metaphysical and epistemological stuff too, and some philosophy of science. So some of this I am riffing on. Some of this is not in the slides, which is a great example of why it's really good to take notes, right? So before we get started though, just a quick word about quiz number 1, because people have been asking me about that. I think that I will probably have this quiz available tomorrow, maybe later this evening. I'm not exactly sure, but at the very latest, sometime tomorrow. And I'll keep it open over the entire weekend and maybe even into Monday. Just as a reminder, the quizzes are designed to shore up what you're learning. So the idea is that even though they're open book and you can begin the test whenever you want, you'll have 30 minutes once you begin, which is why it's a good idea to study everything beforehand. Look over notes if you have them, look over PowerPoint slides, and make sure that you've watched the lectures, certainly, because anything in a reading or on a PowerPoint slide or in one of my lectures is fair game for a quiz. But the idea is not to give you super hard questions. They are, multiple choice, true, false, just enough for you to think a bit, recall what you've learned and studied, which helps reinforce those memory traces, right? That's how it works, right? What did Donald Hebb say about how neurons in the brain learn? Anybody know? No, he said neurons that fire together wire together. And this is the principle of associative learning. So what we're trying to do right here with these quizzes is get your neurons to fire together so they're wired up together really well so that you know all your stuff. So that's the purpose behind these quizzes. So just keep that in mind as you prepare for them. Okay, so extrasensory perception and psychokinesis. This is where really we take our first look at Susan Blackmore's book chapter 21, which is from her book, Consciousness, An Introduction. Now, the whole book is about consciousness, what it is, how we can explain it, all kinds of stuff. And because Blackmore used to be a parapsychologist, she includes chapters on the paranormal, on dreams, on drugs and altered states, on like peak performance. It's a very good book that I actually use for my consciousness seminar that I do. It's a first-year seminar that I've done it once. I'm going to be doing it again in the fall. And Blackmore's book is just really good for that, but we don't cover this chapter in that class. I save it for this class. So why should we study claims of ESP and PK? Well, first of all, what are these? They are extrasensory perception and psychokinesis. Extrasensory perception, I'll get into the details in a moment, but it's the extrasensory motor transfer of information. So we're talking telepathy, which is from mind to mind. We're talking clairvoyance, which is from like an object or an environment or something. Sometimes this is called remote viewing. And then we're talking claims of precognition, which is knowledge from the future. Psychokinesis is the extrasensory motor or purported ability to affect objects. You know, moving stuff with your mind, right? Bending spoons, as Uri Geller used to claim to do. Of course, if he's using telekinesis to bend spoons, he's doing it the hard way, because there's a lot of easier ways to bend spoons using magic tricks and illusions and that sort of thing. Why study these things? After all, I mean, some people believe in these phenomena, but some people find the suggestion of their existence outlandish. I suspect most people are kind of in a spot where they're like, oh yeah, that stuff's probably not real in real life, but they're nonetheless familiar with it from, you know, movies and television shows. You know, obviously you have your paranormal sorts of shows, like, I guess in the 90s it was X-Files, the X-Files. Nowadays, you're probably talking about a show like Stranger Things, right? Which I haven't seen, by the way, but I understand there's some supernatural stuff going on in Stranger Things, right? Some PK and some, you know, X-Men type of powers, whatnot. And heck, comic book movies feature this stuff all the time, right? And they dress it up as sci-fi, but really often it's just magic. So, you know, if you're watching a Marvel movie, you've no doubt seen a character that has one of these, right? So I think some people are kind of in that, you know, there's a few people that probably believe this stuff is really real, a few very ardent skeptics like myself, and most people are kind of just like not bothered about whether they really exist. But they will suspend their belief and, you know, enjoy a comic book movie or something like that features somebody with some special powers. And that's fine. You know, that's cool. That's just a fun imaginative storytelling, right? But no matter where you are, maybe we should take these claims seriously, right? After all, at least according to Blackmore, experiences of the paranormal and belief in the paranormal are quite high, right? Maybe not in these two things, but belief in at least one sort of paranormal ability is quite common. In a Gallup poll that was conducted in the early 90s with a sample size of over 1,000, it was found that 1/4 of the participants claimed they had communicated with someone using ESP. Ooh. Half the participants believed in ESP. Wow. So maybe I'm wrong with my estimate that I just gave. Maybe a lot more people than I think believe in this stuff. Wow. About a decade later, a repeat of the poll showed results that were quite similar to the 1991 survey. We had 41% of respondents who said they believed in some form of extrasensory perception. The breakdown of that was something like 31% said they believed in telepathy, 26% in clairvoyance. Blackmore doesn't give any details on precognition here, but we can assume that the numbers were probably between, I don't know, 20 or 30%, just going from what we see here. But this survey, this poll of paranormal things that people believed in, included a lot of other items. It had 10 items like channeling, ghosts, astrology. Now, not everybody believed in all of these. but almost 3/4 of the people surveyed, and this was a Gallup poll, so it was conducted in the United States, almost 3/4 of Americans surveyed believed in at least one of these paranormal items. It could be ESP, or it could have been ghosts, could have been UFOs. And maybe you're thinking like, oh, okay, but this is America, right? Where, and I'm not picking on America. I'm not trying to pick on America, but in America, religious belief is much higher than in a lot of other developed countries. And belief in conspiracy theories is also a little bit higher than other developed nations. So you might be thinking, well, of course, 3/4 of Americans believe in some sort of paranormal or supernatural claim, because 3/4 of Americans are also very, very religious or perhaps superstitious. And there's a sizable share of those people that also believe in conspiracies, which often include elements of the paranormal. I mean, has anybody heard some of Alex Jones's more radical claims?
Yeah. Infowars. Yeah.
Infowars, right? Like, I mean, I'll just preface this. Like, I remember back in the day, back in the early 2000s, when Alex Jones was just a crank. Like, I remember that. I remember when no one had heard of him. And now everyone knows who he is. And he's said some horrible stuff, you know, like the victims of the Sandy Hook shooting were crisis actors and this kind of thing. And he's all about the New World Order conspiracy theory. These are all quite old conspiracy theories, and they often feature as their as the conspiracy. Yeah, Abby, yeah, I'm with you there. I wish I hadn't heard of him. This guy is just a toxic person. In all, I was
about to say that, Andre. Yeah.
Yeah. The water turning the frogs gay, which I mean, I don't even know what to do with that. Like, okay, so here's the thing about frogs, right? Frogs are amphibians, right? So what frogs do is a female frog lays its eggs and a male frog comes and fertilizes the eggs, right? Like, isn't that how it works? So I don't even know. I don't even know. But usually when you get to that bottom of that Alex Jones abyss, it's either the Jews or demons, right? Or aliens. You know, you also have David Icke, another conspiracist. He's a conspiracy thinker who you know, says like Queen Elizabeth, all the presidents, the Rothschilds. Well, they're actually interdimensional reptilians, right? So there's crossover between paranormal stuff and conspiracy theories. That's why I mentioned that way back in the first lecture. Yeah, they're also shapeshifters. That's right. Sometimes, like, yeah, as Daniel says, sometimes they're the same. Sometimes the aliens are the Jews, which this goes way back in history, by the way. This goes way back to like European anti-Semitism and like blood libel and all kinds of nasty stuff. It is nuts. And this is a great example. You know, Alex Jones has never been more mainstream. So maybe you're thinking, oh, it's just the Americans. But no, a British survey with 6,000 respondents found that 59% of respondents said that they believe in ESP. Unfortunately, Blackmore doesn't give details on what other supernatural or paranormal or conspiratorial things they believe in, but 59% believe in ESP. That's a lot, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean, this doesn't mean that every one of these people believes that you know, everybody has like a psychic powers or something, or that there are these people that can control them, like mediums or psychics or something that are very good at it. No, this also means, this also would include examples of like unexplained You know, weird coincidences. Remember, Freud talks about weird coincidences as being kind of uncanny. Maybe you have a weird coincidence, like you're thinking of a friend, and then all of a sudden you get a text or a call from them, right? We're talking stuff like that. Like, oh, I must have contacted them telepathically, right? So we're talking stuff like that, not necessarily like hardcore believers. Or even just take a look at the example of the dream that Blackmore opens the chapter with. It's a dream about someone having died. Yeah, stuff. Yeah, Dahlia. Yeah. Like stuff like odd coincidences, like, yeah, like it, or maybe people shudder and it feels like, what is that? It's like someone feels like someone walking over my grave or something. People say that when they get a shudder, and it's just like, oh, maybe that was some kind of nefarious telepathy or some kind of ghost or something, right? These kinds of coincidences, or as I was saying, the dream that Blackmore opens the chapter with, which features a man dreaming of somebody in the hospital who's all bloodied and bandaged. And then a few hours later, he gets the call that this person has died in a car accident, right? So that would be an example of something that that person might believe is a precognitive dream. Or if not a precognitive dream, if not knowledge about the future, then just some kind of sixth sense type of situation, right? So you know, people do have these experiences. These are anomalous experiences. They happen, right? It is true that people think about someone and then get a call from them, or dream about someone dying and then they find they died. That does happen. The question is, what's the best explanation? Is it the paranormal, or is it probability, right? In the end of the chapter, Blackmore will go on to point out that said there was a mathematician in Britain who worked out the odds of something like this happening. You know, given the population of Britain, the number of car crashes, the number of dreams people recall, he did all of the math, and he worked out that the chances of the stats on this are as follows. Someone will have a dream and then receive news that person has died roughly once every 2 weeks in the United Kingdom. So every 2 weeks, one person out of everyone in the UK will have a dream about someone they know dying, and just as a matter of numbers, the person is dead, right? So you know, these experiences can happen, and they are anomalous, but we need to explain them with the principles of naturalism. So I say, that's what I say. But we should also study claims of ESP and PK, because as Blackmore shows us very effectively here, a lot of people believe in this stuff. And, you know, it's not just a matter of belief, you know, like if a lot of people believe in ESP and PK, well, then you could argue that one reason to study claims of ESP and PK is simply because there is a big public interest in it, right? I mean, people get excited about science, even though you know, maybe scientific literacy isn't as high as I would like it to be in some places. People are still interested in what scientists are up to, right? Just look at the James Webb Space Telescope, right? That just went online, and we just got some of the first deep field images from the James Webb Space Telescope. I'm like, oh my goodness, amazing, right? And this stuff is trending on all the social media sites, and it's wonderful. So people do take an interest in what scientists are up to. So if scientists were like, let's study this, I think people would be interested in that. But not only that, there would be massive implications for science if it were shown that ESP and PK existed. For example, if telepathy were real, then double-blind experiments would be unreliable. So would experiments in which we have to keep information from our participants, right? So what's a double-blind study? Anybody know? It's a good thing to know if you're talking about this kind of stuff. Dahlia.
It's an experiment where the participant and then the person conducting the experiment both don't know what the other one is doing.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. Like, and this is a big thing in psychology and also in medicine, right? Say I'm a physician and I'm running a study. I got two groups. I've got the control group, which gets a placebo, and I have the experimental group, which gets the medicine. Now, they don't know which group they're in. And if it were a double-blind study, I also would not know which group the participants are in until I start analyzing the data. The reason we'd like to do this in psychology is so that the experimenter is not aware of what stimulus or what condition is coming next for the participant. And that way the experimenter cannot accidentally influence the participant. So that's why this is important. Oftentimes we don't even do double-blind experiments. We just do them in a way to keep the participants naive. But in either case, like for example, in my PhD thesis, we told people, we had people interact with a little robot thing in virtual reality because we wanted to study how people got on with virtual characters. We told them it was a computer program, but actually it was just my confederate in the other room working this virtual character sort of Wizard of Oz style, right? But of course, the participants weren't told that until they were debriefed, because if they knew that, it would have ruined the experiment. If telepathy were real, it might affect this way of doing experiments. We couldn't do it because you might accidentally leak your thoughts to your participants or something, right? If psychokinesis were real and we can affect the world in an extrasensory motor way, the results of physics experiments would have to be discarded, especially quantum physics. And I'll say more about the reasons why as we get into the lecture. If something like precognition were real, right? If I could get knowledge of the future from the future, well, that would just mean we'd have to like rewrite all of physics and all of cognitive science. Everything we know about the mind and the universe would be wrong. It would be the biggest paradigm shift ever, man. So yeah, Dahlia, yeah, that's right. Common for clinical trials like degenerative diseases. Yeah, exactly. Because the physician can't know and the patient also can't know, because that could affect the results, you know. It's all about keeping everyone's biases out of the picture, right? Science is by no means perfect, but science is kind of like the best tool we have for finding out how the physical world works. So, you know, scientists say all the time, like, oh, I'm a scientist, I'm so super rational. But you know what? Even the most rational scientist has biases, makes errors of thinking. So science has these mechanisms built into it to try and correct for that. And the double-blind experiment is one of those mechanisms. So very good. Thank you, Dahlia. What's another reason? Well, before we get to some other reasons, let's just recall some metaphysics here. Remember that we talked about metaphysical naturalism and methodological naturalism. Both of these imply a more specific metaphysical view called materialism or physicalism. Metaphysical naturalism, I think, it really implies physicalism, because metaphysical naturalism is the position that, you know, the only things that exist are what are natural, what's out there in nature, matter, energy, this stuff. So it's just physical stuff. It's matter in motion, right? Methodological naturalism isn't quite as hardcore. Methodological naturalism just says, well, you know, there might be some supernatural stuff, but we can't study that. We can only study what is natural, what is physical, like material processes in nature. So physicalism or materialism, for the philosophers in the class, will be familiar with this. They'll know that it's a kind of substance monism, right? So only physical stuff exists. That's substance monism. There's no immaterial substance, right? There's no spirits, gods, souls, at least not how they're traditionally conceived. Spirits, I mean. And moreover, the mind is contingent upon the brain. So the brain is the thing that implements or realizes the mind. I don't want to say that the brain is hardware and the mind is software. That's a tempting analogy, but it's not quite right. It's not quite right. And I can't really do justice to why it's not quite right. But it has to do with just the way neural networks in the brain work. The brain is a fascinating organ, and I wish I could tell you more about it right now, but I have to stick to the metaphysics. I'll tell you more about the brain after if we've got the time. So substance monism, you'll know that we can contrast, if you've studied some philosophy before, you'll know that we can contrast it with a different metaphysical outlook. That's substance dualism, and this is due, of course, to René Descartes. Right? René Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, who believed that there were two different kinds of fundamental substance. Well, two different kinds of limited substance or finite substance, mind and matter. So for Descartes, there is an infinite substance. Does anyone know what the infinite substance is for Descartes? It's pretty easy. Daniel.
God.
Yeah, it's God. God is the only infinite substance. And then there are finite substances. Matter or res extensa, that's extended substance. So it takes up space. You know, it interacts with other matter. This is the stuff, right? The stuff that physicists would study. So res extensa. Then there's mind or res cogitans. That's a thinking substance, which is non-physical, doesn't take up any space. And really, essentially, it's the soul for Descartes. It is the rational soul. Everything about the mind is due to it being this thinking substance. And both of these come from the infinite substance, from God, Descartes would say. So because we have a soul, Descartes says, we have consciousness, we have reason, we have morality, we have free will, we have experience. And it's all because the soul, the immaterial soul, the rational soul, interacts with the body via the pineal gland, Descartes argued. The pineal gland is a little gland in the brain. It's actually a part of the endocrine system. But Descartes thought that it was the locus of the mind-body connection. So our bodies are extended substance. Our bodies, for Descartes, were essentially automata. They were robots, like robots created by God. And the mind, the soul, controlled them. Animals don't have souls, Descartes said. So, you know, your dog is an automaton. I have a dog. Tula, do you want to come and be in the lecture? No, my dog is lazy. But Descartes would say that my dog over here is merely an automaton. And humans are the exclusive possessors of rational souls. This is an old idea, though. This is a very old idea. I mean, it goes all the way back to Plato and probably farther back. I mean, Plato had Plato had an understanding of the soul that we call a tripartite soul. It's called tripartite soul. And that means we have three parts to our soul. We have an appetitive soul, which is the part of soul that governs our appetite. So we have, we're talking thirst, hunger, sexual desire, stuff like that, right? Animalistic drives. Then there's the passionate or the spirited soul. This is the province of the soul where we find the emotions, the passions. And then the rational soul, which is the intellect. That's the nous. That's where you have logos and episteme and all of that nice stuff. Aristotle has something similar. He has the vegetative soul, or the nutritive soul, which is responsible for growth and taking in nutriment, reproduction. He also has a sort of sensitive soul, which is emotion, perception, locomotion, and he also has the rational soul. It does, and you can almost argue that you can argue that we haven't really let this distinction go. It's kind of there unconsciously, right? You know, as Daniel says, the forebrain, the frontal cortex, is responsible for executive function, cognitive control, rational thought. The midbrain is where we have the sensory motor cortex, the premotor cortex, or rather the somatosensory cortex, the premotor, and the motor cortex. So we move, we feel. The hindbrain is perception. Also, the temporal lobes are important for audition and also for memory. So, and hell, Freud has a tripartite soul. Freud has a ego and superego. So we haven't let this idea go, right? But Aristotle, by the way, did not believe the soul was immaterial. Aristotle believed the soul was merely the form of an organized body. Aristotle was kind of like the first functionalist, you know. But Plato was the metaphysical guy. He was the guy who said the soul is an actual thing that leaves the body and after death and stuff. If you want to know more about ancient conceptions of the soul, I do have some of my old lectures from Minds and Machines, my course on Minds and Machines, where I talk about mechanistic philosophy and the understanding of the mind and the soul throughout, from antiquity all the way up to the age of AI. Check that out if you want to learn more about the soul. So Plato, Descartes believed the soul could survive death, and this is also, notice, common to the Abrahamic religions, right? As well as some Eastern religions. But let's talk about the Abrahamic religions, who were, by the way, influenced by Plato and Aristotle to a great extent, right? You know, in early Jewish religion, you know, when you were dead, you were just dead, right? Life was over. You were dead. It's only when Christianity comes along that you start to get ideas about like bodily resurrection and or going to heaven, or something like that. And that, of course, continued on once Islam became a thing. Adalia, go ahead.
I'm Jewish and I went to parochial school for 9 years. My understanding for years was that there's like the written Torah, which was the Old Testament,
right?
And then in the oral Torah, which came after that, there was discussion of like life after death and like Gehenim, which is like the purgatory almost.
Right. Thank you for that. Yeah, because I only know about the very early stuff. Like, so can you tell us more about this purgatory idea?
So in Judaism, there's no hell, but there is. Sorry, I'm sitting outside of Starbucks. Sorry if it's loud.
No worries.
There is a heaven, and then there's like this place that every single person goes to before heaven, which is this place where your soul is supposed to be cleansed. It's like a purgatory.
Okay.
Where in Judaism, there's something known as a mikvah, which is like a ritual bath that cleanses your soul. And that's what we have kind of in the physical world. And then in the like after world, I guess, after you die, there's like a spiritual mikveh, and that's Gehenim, and everyone goes there. And that's why there's an 11-month mourning period for people here.
Like after Shiva, and then right, okay. Oh, thank you. See, I learned something. That's great. Thank you, Dahlia. Yeah. Admittedly, my knowledge of the Abrahamic religions is primarily limited to like Middle Age Christianity and Islam. But yeah, so I guess around the time that Christianity got going, the oral Torah would have been well established, right? Because there was a community.
Yes,
So I guess in Moses's day, maybe they wouldn't have had this idea of life after death, but it was something that eventually came to the scene. And where I want to get with this is that we have this kind of Western synthesis, right? Where ideas from Greek rationalism, primarily due to Plato and Aristotle, have merged with early Christian, Jewish scholarship, and later Islamic scholarship to create a kind of Western synthesis about the soul. And Descartes is working in that tradition, because Descartes was educated as a Jesuit, which is kind of like a Catholic professor, or theologian professor kind of thing, right? So that's what we have now. That's I guess metaphysically where we're at in terms of the background for belief on this kind of stuff, right? This is our cultural thing. This has been the cultural backdrop for many, many, many years. A sort of Western synthesis of Greek rationalism, Judeo-Christian stuff, and then some Islamic stuff on top of that. So maybe that's why belief in the paranormal is so high, because culturally, I mean, we have culturally supported beliefs in the supernatural. That's religion, right? So maybe that's why some people who believe, I'm not saying that people who are religious are unreasonable and they all believe in silly paranormal things, by the way. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that when a belief is culturally supported, other similar beliefs can kind of make their way in and be assimilated into one's worldview, right? So why talk about all this metaphysics, right? Well, often when people are looking into the paranormal, trying to show evidence for the paranormal, it is to undermine the more recent materialist theories of the world, and particularly theories of the mental. Daniel, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, you're talking about how, like, we have kind of these religious ideas that, because they inhabit a similar space to the paranormal ideas, might contribute to why their paranormal ideas are more accepted. And I was wondering, like, is there a lot of work done on, like, how the different paranormal ideas we have are actually just kind of like certain evolutions of existing religious ideas?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, and I think there's a couple different ways that this can happen. And the main one is probably when religion mixes with folklore, right? So this isn't, like, strictly speaking supernatural, but think about, for example, the Day of the Dead in Latin American countries, right? Which is oh, really? Oh, I ask you about that in a moment. To freak out kids. Yeah. Well, okay, so I have a couple things to say. So, like, my example of that mixing would be like the Day of the Dead, right? Which is, if I'm not mistaken, it's on All Saints Day, which in English speaking countries is the day after Halloween, right? All Hallows Eve, right? Anyway, the Day of the Dead is a result of a sort of mixture between indigenous folklore and Catholicism, right? And they mesh so well. The idea is it's the day when the spirits of the dead will come back, right? And they might visit you, and so it's a day that you remember your ancestors who have died, right? But it's interesting because most people who celebrate the Day of the Dead, I mean, they're Catholic. But the Day of the Dead is not traditionally outside of Latin America a Catholic thing. It's a thing that happened because Catholic thought and indigenous thought got kind of like intertwined together. So I think that's one way that that can happen. And Dahlia brings up a good point about how there are scary stories that might be told, you know, in this case, to freak out little kids. I don't know any Jewish demon stories, but I do know of some Icelandic folklore because I've always wanted to go there. It's my dream vacation spot. Anyway, in Iceland, there is a locale called the Dimmuborgir. Dimmuborgir means dark towers. It's also the name of a black metal band from Norway, if you're into that sort of thing. But so a part of Icelandic folklore would be to tell the children, because it's a volcanic area, there's lots of caves, there's lots of ways to die, essentially. And Iceland was a tough place to live. So they would say, you can't go to the Dimmuborgir because there's a witch, you know, and the witch is going to eat you if you go there. So don't go there. Don't, come on, kids, don't go where the witch is. So again, this is part of the local folklore. And I would imagine, Dahlia, that the Jewish demon stories, you know, they probably share a lot of the same themes as other, like maybe fairy tales or didactic stories from other parts of folklore. The themes are the same, but the figures are, you know, culturally appropriate to where the thing comes from, right? So
oh yeah, absolutely. And then they're also very related to like watch your back type situations.
Oh really?
To keep people like very aware. It's just like prosecution throughout history.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. And that's what I was curious about, because I mean, I don't know a lot of Jewish folklore. I know a little bit about the Golem of Prague, for example. But I don't know if that's meant, I don't know if that's the kind of story that you're talking about. Do you have an example of such a story that you would like to share?
Sure. I mean, if you really want to scare yourself, go look up Shadim. I'm still afraid to talk about them once it's dark out.
Oh,
like,
okay. Well, you don't have to tell that story then.
Well, it's not dark out, so it's fine. But the idea is that, like, if you say their name after the first 2 stars have appeared in the sky, they'll come like basically steal your firstborn child, a little bit like Rumpelstiltskin.
Oh man, yeah, okay, yeah, that's kind of frightening.
Yeah, and then I have like grandparents who, like my grandmother, she had a miscarriage with her first baby. But there was one day, she tells this story that like she was so angry, so she like swore the name of the Shadim, and she like threw her slipper, which is like part of it, and you're like to throw a shoe. And then that night she like saw this angel, scary looking thing in her kitchen.
Whoa.
And she had a miscarriage for her firstborn baby. So this is my grandmother. We're all like, yeah, Bubby, thank you. But
wow. Now,
yeah, that's the family story.
But that is a great example of an anomalous experience, though. Like, I mean, when I hear something like that, I don't go, oh, they're crazy, or that didn't happen. What I want to know is like, oh, okay, but how can I explain something like that, right? So that's a great example of not only a scary story, but an anomalous experience. And it sounds like that would have been a rough experience for your grandmother. So I feel for her in that regard.
Yes.
Yeah, like because anomalous experiences happen to people, and people like, hey, I want to explain them because I'm a scientist, but other people want to explain them because they may not understand what has happened to them. And a religious or folkloric worldview gives you the tools to understand an anomalous experience, even if that's not what literally happened. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah.
It's also sometimes nice to have something to say, like, oh, cause and effect, because you can't always tell.
Yeah. I mean, humans are the kinds of creatures that want an explanation. And even if we don't get an absolutely correct explanation, just any explanation will, because we need to know, right? We don't like not knowing. This was Yench's whole point. We don't like not knowing. It's not cool to not know. So we need to know, and we reach for explanations. But that's all very great. Thank you for that, Dahlia. That was fascinating. That was a fascinating example. Now in my line of work in science, and I guess parapsychologists count themselves amongst scientists, they wish to explain these things in a way often that violates naturalism, that undermines materialist theories of the mind. And there are good reasons why they might want to do, good reasons to them why they might want to do this. Freud, you recall from last time, Freud talked about the term that he heard from one of his patients, the omnipotence of thoughts, right? A related idea nowadays that we see is the power of consciousness, or mind over matter is a big one. Everyone's heard that phrase, mind over matter. Or the law of attraction is another one that makes me angry. Who's heard of the law of attraction? All right. Well, if you haven't heard of it, consider yourselves lucky, because it's very silly. I think it's quite silly. The law of attraction is an idea that like attracts like. It's basically the idea that you can manifest positive things in your life by being positive, by having like a vision board. You know, it's discussed a lot in the documentary The Secret, which was based on a book, Rhonda Byrne, The Secret. I see Jean-Francois has heard of it. Yeah, that's how I feel. So I watched The Secret back in the day with my girlfriend at the time. Wow, it's getting really windy outside. The spirits are angry with me. So I watched The Secret a long time ago with my girlfriend at the time, and I was a skeptic back then, you know. So they have philosophers. Oh yeah, see, well, shouldn't have done that. I don't even have a slipper to throw, so yeah. So the law of attraction and these philosophers, I use air quotes heavily because they're all like, yeah, oh, Plato wrote about the law of attraction. You know, if you put out your positive thoughts or your positive manifestations or whatever, your willpower, you're going to get, the universe is going to go like, they literally have in What the Bleep Do We Know, which is a similar, it says the exact same stuff, except couches it in terms of quantum physics. They literally have a giant genie appear on screen as the universe, and he says, your wish is my command. This is the idea that you can just ask things of the universe and you'll get them. And they say like, oh, Plato, blah, blah, blah. Look, I've read a lot of Plato. Plato didn't say anything about this. You know, this is pseudo philosophy, but it's an idea that psychologists call magical thinking, the power of thoughts to affect the world. So in The Secret, it's done in a sort of pop philosophy, self-help kind of way. In What the Bleep Do We Know, it's framed in quantum mysticism. This is not ESP or PK in the strict sense, but it is quite related. Yes, that's true. Like if you're, but there's nothing magical about that, right? Like everybody knows a grumpy person in their life, you know, and the grumpy person might be like, grumpy about some particular thing. And it's like, but you could just change your outlook, or Or, you know, like maybe you'd have more friends if you weren't grumpy, or maybe you just have a better time if you let go of your grumpiness, right? And that's certainly not magical, but people, I think people can get mixed up, you know. I think people do, some people I've talked to have seen these films and they look at it this way and they ignore the supernatural mystical elements of it. And I say, well, I'm glad that you're doing that. But what the film is not saying that. The film is saying you need to manifest positive stuff with your thinking and the universe will give it to you, right? So anyway, that latter thing, it's not PK or ESP in the strict sense, but it is a similar idea, I think. One book along the lines here of these works that Blackmore discusses is by Dean Radden. So The Conscious Universe, The Scientific Truth of Psychic Phenomena by Dean Radden. Now, Dean Radden is a parapsychologist who I believe heads up the Consciousness Research Laboratory at the Institute for Noetic Sciences, which is just basically a parapsychology laboratory. And he's got these weird ideas about morphic resonance. It's basically the force, that there's like energy fields between everything, and you know, it's the force. He says that understanding experiences like ESP and PK requires an expanded view of human consciousness. Expanded view seems to me to imply a non-materialist view, just like the magical thinking in The Secret or in What the Bleep Do We Know? So claims of the paranormal need to be taken seriously, and they need to be very carefully scrutinized, because if paranormal claims are true, we would need to rewrite the book, as it were. Science wouldn't work. And also a lot of people believe in this stuff, and if it's real, they want to know. So we should take claims of paranormal activity seriously, but we should scrutinize them heavily. As Carl Sagan said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So if someone says to me, I can move objects with my mind, I'm not going to dismiss them right off the bat. What I will do is say, okay, show me, you know, because chances are, if you ask them to show you, you'll discover that they can't, or that they're using trickery, and that's better than just dismissing it out of hand, I think. And if something were to turn out to be real, well, that would just be awesome. That would be the biggest paradigm shift ever. So, but if paranormal claims are false, we should try and explain why beliefs in the paranormal are as widespread as they are, right? And we would also need to explain people's paranormal experiences, or as I like to call them, anomalous experiences, naturalistically. And that's what anomalistic psychology is about. And of course, if these claims are true, then we've got a lot of work ahead of us. We have to work out the implications for science and for philosophy. We would really have to ask, oh, geez, what the bleep do we actually know, right? If we were to find something that's actually really actually paranormal. And who knows, it's a big universe, as the James Webb Space Telescope is showing us. And the James Webb Space Telescope is able to look back. I think it can look, it can see things like 13 billion light years away. So the universe is like 13.8 billion years old. And so we're talking like when the first stars and galaxies are forming. So that's how big the universe is. Like we cannot even comprehend how big it is. You know, we can look at a picture, we will never grasp the scale of the universe. So who knows what crazy undiscovered stuff is out there, but we need evidence, right? We need evidence for it. So right here is the point in her chapter where Blackmore discusses some of what we've already covered. So I'm not going to talk too much about the psychical research stuff. But, you know, one of those scientists, we did learn this previously, William Crookes, had sought a non-materialist explanation for paranormal claims that he had encountered. He was you know, looking at people holding seances, photographic evidence, because cameras were quite new in the late 19th and early 20th century. Cameras and photography were new. People didn't understand like artifacts and photographs. People didn't know how to look out for fakery in photographs. So William Crookes, I believe he had also lost his son. He was dealing with the death of his son, and he was convinced of the evidence for life after death, and sought non-materialist explanations for seances, photographs that apparently showed ghosts, stuff like that. But others were skeptical at the time. Michael Faraday is a great example of this. He was a very famous scientist. He's famous for you know, when Queen Victoria, he's doing a demonstration about electricity. He was way into electricity, this guy. And in fact, thanks to him and James Clerk Maxwell, we worked out all the stuff we know about electricity. Faraday was interesting. Faraday was something of a self-taught guy. Yeah, the Faraday Cage. Yeah, the Faraday Cage is named after Faraday. If you've ever done some work, like I did some work with EEGs, electroencephalography, when I was in grad school in my neuroscience class. And when we do those experiments, we do them inside a Faraday cage to keep out all the interference from electronics outside of the room, so that we can detect the electrical changes in electrical potential at the scalp with the EEG. It's to get rid of noise. But yeah, the Faraday cage, he could stand in the Faraday cage and there'd be like a lightning thing and he wouldn't get shocked. He'd do these cool public demonstrations, kind of like Nikola Tesla would do later on. Queen Victoria famously asked him, you know, oh, who cares about electricity? What good is this? And he famously said, what good, what use is a newborn baby, ma'am? You know, it's like, we've just found electricity. We've just discovered it. We're just using it. And now look, everything runs on it. So Faraday actually did some scientific investigation that we'll learn about next time into things like seances and stuff. And he busted some frauds by using science. So that's pretty cool. So not everybody was super duper paranormal or into the paranormal. There were some skeptics. Later on, of course, we got parapsychology. So thanks to JB and Louisa Rhine, working at Duke University. Of course, we learned that they did not use individuals who claim to have special powers. So the psychical researchers would have said like, oh, there's this medium, you know, I don't know, this medium, I can't think of a name for a medium. You know, there's a medium over here who says that she can communicate with the spirits of the dead. Oh, we need to get her into the lab. You know, that's what the psychical researchers were about. But not the Rhines. They were like, look, everybody probably has some kind of latent psi ability, if the ability exists. So we should just study regular people, right? So that's what they did. I see Jean-Francois doing this.
Oh, Daniel, what he wrote. Oh my God.
Oh, what's I don't get it.
Medium rare, like a steak.
Uh-huh.
Get out of here. Door's that way.
Medium rare. Okay. That's good. Oh, puns, man. I knew this guy in graduate school. His name was Jeremy. He wasn't in grad school, but I was in grad school and I was in residence, and he was this big, tall guy. He was like 6'6". I'm pretty tall, but he was taller than me. He was like 6'6", deep kind of voice like this. and he had like a pun savant ability, like where he could just come up with a pun for anything. It was pretty great. So yeah. So they studied the Rhines, by the way, were the people who came up with these terms for psi, right? And ESP and PK. We learned that they used Zener cards to study different forms of ESP. Remember, those are the cards with the different symbols on them. And PK would be tested by examining whether people could influence the outcomes of dice rolls. This was one of the only times when the Rhines studied somebody who claimed to have a special ability. There was actually a gambler that that got in contact with the Rhines who claimed that he could influence the rolls of the dice with his mind. But by and large, they didn't look at people who claimed to have these special abilities. So this is a little breakdown of these abilities right here. So we have the psi abilities. They coined the term psi to refer to paranormal abilities studied by parapsychologists. So for ESP, or extrasensory perception, we have telepathy, which, as I mentioned before, is the transmissions of thoughts between mind to mind outside of known sensory channels. There's clairvoyance, which is where you can get information from, you know, a place, a person, or event. Sometimes this is called remote viewing. And precognition, which is awareness of events before they happen. You know, seeing the future. So there you have them here on this little tree graph. PK is psychokinesis. We used to call it telekinesis, but the Rhines changed it. They changed it to psychokinesis, and it is described as the extramotor ability to influence objects in the environment. So, you know, moving things with your mind or affecting physical processes with your mind. So we've already talked a little bit about the processes here. So I want to talk about other interesting lines of psi research that Blackmore discusses. But before I do that, I just have to step away for a second, just for 2 minutes, and I'll be right back. But feel free to talk amongst yourselves about, oh, there's my dog. Hello, you little automaton. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves about what we've discussed thus far, and I will be back in just a moment.
Just looking that up right now, Daniel. It's the Carl Jung or Jung. I don't know how to pronounce it. Is it silent J, like jogging? Young. Thank you, Abby. So it's like the opposite of correlation doesn't equate to causation. Describe circumstances that appear meaningfully related yet lack a causal connection. Interesting. He's the first to coin the term. We're talking about Carl Jung. Are you in the Discord? I am. Yeah, you just posted a link.
Oh, you guys are talking about Jung?
Yeah, synchronicity.
Okay. I don't know too much about Jung. I'm more of a Freud guy. But yeah, if you're posting stuff in the Discord about Jung, I'll take a look at it for my benefit. Okay, so yeah, sorry about that, guys. I had to step away to the washroom. But okay, where were we? Well, we've been talking about different lines of ESP research. Modern parapsychology has kind of gone beyond the Zener card approach or the dice roll approach. Let's just get myself out of the way here. one line of ESP research that's kind of interesting is dream research. Dreams are sort of paranormal in some respects, or at least they're thought of that way by some people. We used to think that dreams were prophetic in some cases, or that they came from the gods or spirits or perhaps ancestors, right? So it's kind of a natural place to go, right? If you're a parapsychologist and you want to study ESP, maybe you could do that with dreams. You know, that's pretty paranormal, pretty parapsychological. And these experiments used free response methods. This is different than Zener card experiments because those are forced, right? Zener cards are, the deck is shuffled, so whatever card's going to come up is whatever card is going to come up. Yeah, I guess that's what people are thinking, because people have this idea, and we'll encounter it as we continue with today's material. People have an idea, parapsychologically inclined people, I mean, have this idea that what we need to do is quiet the mind, right? Like Russell Targ, who we'll talk about in a moment, says we all have these innate powers, these innate abilities. They're present in all of us, but because of the clatter of the conscious mind, they don't come through, right? And I think that's the similar idea here. It's an idea that you see in these areas where, you know, maybe the problem is that when I'm awake, the mind is too busy. But maybe if I'm dreaming, maybe I'm in the right state of mind for some kind of psi things to happen, right? And so these waves that you're describing are levels of electrical activity that we detect at the scalp, right? That's what brain waves are. People, I'm watching Star Trek the other day, right? I'm watching Strange New Worlds, which I'm sorry, guys, I'm such a nerd, but I'm watching the new Trek, and I'm loving it, right? Because we got Spock. Okay, Spock's awesome. We got like a young Uhura. You know, we got Captain Pike. Man, so many cool people. And you know, the doctor there, he says in one episode, like, oh, his brain waves are abnormal or something. And I'm like, but that's like, it's not like there are brain waves in your brain, though. That's the reading you get, you know. That's like if I were to look at if I were to look at say I'm following, COVID-19 levels, and I look at, oh no, my lines are going up, you don't say that, right? If you have like certain brain waves, what you have are certain voltages that are detectable, which indicate a certain level of activity. It's not like there are like waves in your brain, right? So anyway, that happens even on Star Trek. That mix up happens sometimes. Yeah, like this. So so that's the similar idea here. What's Daniel saying? This is just suggesting that telepathy is not an at-will ability. Yes. Yeah, and we're going to get there. That's the idea. That's kind of where Blackmore ends up, actually. She says that if ESP is real, then it's not under conscious control, in which case, who cares? It has been investigated by Bem. I can't remember his first name, but his name is Bem, B-E-M, and he's a psychologist who studies this stuff. And he found that he was doing like tests of ESP, pre-K, and telepathy, and he found something slightly above chance when the images used in the experiment were sexually charged rather than neutral. So he's showing, he's giving people like a sort of forced choice task where you can choose A or B. If you do it with like fruit or something where it's like apple or banana, people score at chance levels. But if you do it with like sexually charged imagery, like if you have like underwear models like embracing or something, like it's not very graphic, but Yeah, that's why he doesn't do it with like dire circumstances, because you can't do that, right? Like welcome to the lab, and then pull out a gun, and you can't do it.
Oh my God.
You can't get it through ethics. Like, do you guys know the Milgram experiments?
Right, the prisoner in San Francisco, the prisoner and security guards.
Well,
And it went way too-
that's the
Yeah.
Stanford prison experiment, right? But that is similar. But the Milgram experiment was the teacher is who's being experimented on, and they think they're delivering the shocks.
The shocks. Yeah.
So in the Milgram experiment, what Milgram did is he convinced people that they killed someone. You know, you can't do that. Like, so if you sit down, yeah, like Abby says, if you come into the lab and I'm like, hello, participant. All right, let's see if you can stop this bullet with your mind. Like, no, you can't do that. It's unethical. So BEM does it with sexually charged imagery, because, you know, if I pull a gun on you, the fight or flight response is half of what the sympathetic nervous system does. The sympathetic, it's the 4 F's, okay? It's fight, flight, freeze, or fuck. So that's why BEM uses sexually charged imagery. He found something that was slightly above chance, but again, it's not been replicated, and it's probably due to statistics, p hacking, or any number of things. I worked very briefly with a psych professor at Carleton, Guy Lacroix, and he calls BEM old BEM Kenobi, like Ben Kenobi from Star Wars, because it's the Force. So BEM Kenobi. I can't remember his first name. I only know him as BEM Kenobi, thanks to Guy Lacroix from Carleton when I was back in his lab group. So yeah. Daryl BEM, that's it. Yeah, that's it, Daniel. Yeah, Daryl BEM. BEM Kenobi. When presented with that's interesting. I'd have to look into the details of an experiment like that. But yeah, Daryl BEM has done something like this, but not with like violence, just with sexy stuff. But anyway, I'm getting way off track here. The idea is that you quiet the mind if you're dreaming, and you know, maybe your alpha waves or whatever waves, or if you're in REM. I mean, if you're in REM sleep, your brain is nearly as active as it is when you're awake. So it's during slow wave sleep that your mind is the least active. But we'll talk more about the stages of sleep when we have our lecture on dreams. So free response method, how does that work? Well, the participants would come into a sleep lab. Let me get myself out of the way here. They'd come into a sleep lab, and they would be woken up during REM sleep, and they had to just report their dreams. We seldom remember dreams that we do not wake up from. You know, a lot of people think that they never dream, but it's not true. We dream multiple times every night, but we easily forget our dreams unless we awaken directly from them. So while they slept, it's supposed to say, an agent is looking at a randomly chosen target, and they're trying to, I guess, beam this image into the dreamer's brain with telepathy, right? And there's some interesting correspondence that are observed in experiments like this, you know, between the target that the agent viewed and the dream that the participant reported. And usually they use a small set of targets, 4 to 6. And then experimenters can use this small set to work out the probability of the correspondence recurring by chance. And then, of course, the described imagery had to be compared against the actual targets that were sent. Sometimes the participant does this, and sometimes an independent judge is brought in to do this. So here's the idea. I'm in the sleep lab, I'm sleeping. A rapid eye movement begins, and the agent maybe has got has got a target. Like I've got a couple of or there guitar behind me, so that's my target. So I'm staring at that guitar and I'm thinking of it and I'm trying to deliver it telepathically to the dreamer. And the dreamer hasn't, he or she is not aware of any of the targets. So then we wake up our dreamer and they describe their dream and we see if anything corresponds to the guitar. Now, this can be tricky, but it's probably better to do this with an independent judge rather than the participant, because think of the confounds here. You know, maybe I had a dream of a violin. Well, that's not a guitar, but is that because the thought of the guitar got into my brain and altered slightly on the way in? Or is it because I was listening to Vivaldi's Four Seasons earlier that day, right? I don't know. But yeah, you can see the risk of confounds here. Now, initially, these results from studies like these were above chance. So there was a lot of excitement, as with the Rhines research. The Rhines initially got that hit rate of 7.1, 7.1 rather than 5 for their Zener card experiments, which, given the size of their sample, was significant. And we saw some early successes like this with dream research too. But the old, sorry,
the Rhines, the 7.1, it was never replicated, right?
No. Well, Soul managed to do even better than that with his 2 participants who were like, they weren't getting it right for the card that was being drawn, but there were 2 participants he found that had a hit rate for the next card. But then it was discovered that Soul had manipulated his data. He had left blank spaces in his random number tables that he could insert, or the blank spaces in the thing that he had generated from his like log tables or whatever. So he fudged the numbers. He cheated. And it was another parapsychologist who found that out, So, there are good parapsychologists out there. It was Barbara something or other. But she wanted to vindicate Soul, and she did this incredibly detailed analysis, and she found out to her dismay that, oh no, he cheated, So, I mean, good for her though. She figured that out. So replication is the problem. Replication is that beast that rears its head again and again for parapsychologists. You need to replicate. You have to be able to replicate in principle. So dream studies kind of fell out of favor, but they changed the methodology. They changed the methodology to study something called remote viewing. Remote viewing is kind of similar to clairvoyance. As I said, here's an example. A person goes to a remote location and he or she will look around that location for a predetermined length of time, maybe half an hour. Then the subject sits elsewhere. He or she will relax and report the impressions or mental images that she experiences. Later, the subject or an independent judge will match the impressions with a list of possible target locations to see if she can pick the right one. So here it's the judge that's trying to get the impressions of the location from the person who went there. And then based on that, trying to pick the location that the target person had actually been to. So it was Russell Targ and Harold Puthoff that popularized this. They're both physicists who are working at the Stanford Research Institute, which still exists. It's no longer affiliated. It used to be affiliated with Stanford University back in the 60s and early 70s. I'm not sure if it still was in the late 70s. In any case, it's no longer affiliated with Stanford now. Lots of interesting stuff happened there. The first autonomous robot was built and tested at the Stanford Research Institute. One of my favorite robots. I study robots, as you know, from the Uncanny Valley tangents I went on. I like robots. And the very first robot, a very first autonomous robot, was Shaky. And that was built at the Stanford Research Institute. And nowadays, if you want to see Shaky, you can visit the Robotics Museum at Carnegie Mellon University. Shaky is there. But Shaky was a pretty cool machine. But obviously, they're doing many different things there, including this kind of research, parapsychology. So now Targ and Puthoff's method for studying remote viewing, again, revealed significant results. But Marks and Kahneman thought that there might have been methodological problems, methodological confounds that might have explained the results that they got. So we're coming up against a number of different problems when it comes to parapsychological research or research on psi. One of those problems is replicability, and another is methodology. Sometimes the methodology is suspect. And that doesn't mean that people are cheating. That doesn't necessarily mean that people are cheating. What it means is that people are designing their experiments in such a way that they're not accounting for confounds like sensory leakage or stuff like that, right? So just because there's a problem with methodology in an experiment, it doesn't mean that people are cheating, right? It's the principle of charity. Even though we're trying to take a skeptical approach toward these claims, we nonetheless have to be charitable. So we need to use the principle of charity. So that's what we get. We get methodological problems too. As we get closer to the 90s, we had the American Institutes for Research reporting on the Stargate project. What was Stargate? Well, it wasn't actually an attempt to send Kurt Russell through the Stargate to another planet or another dimension or whatever. No, it was actually a government-funded espionage research program. And I remember it this way: espionage, ESP, espionage. See, you get it? It's using remote viewing to spy. It went over 24 years. It cost $22 million of the American taxpayers' money, and it was devoted to using remote viewing for intelligence gathering. And this was a Cold War thing. This was a thing where the Americans were kind of looking for any edge they could get over the Soviets, including using remote viewers to spy on the Soviets. And you know, the crazy thing is, the Soviets were doing the exact same thing. They also had their own equivalent of the Stargate program, which is just like, man, it's amazing. So the American Institute for Research reported on this project. Some found their results convincing. Others did not, of course. And this is something that Hyman talked about in his paper, which we read earlier. Ray Hyman, remember, Hyman is a psychologist who used to be a magician. So he knows some of the tricks of the trade. Questions the methods that were used. And the significance of the results that were obtained by the analysis. Jessica Utz, who was the other main analyst, claimed that Stargate provided some of the best evidence of psi that had been obtained up until that time. Utz and Hyman continued to disagree about how to understand the results of these studies. I tend to side with Hyman. Yes, I know that Utz is a statistician, so she probably has the edge over Hyman when it comes to statistical analysis, but I think that Hyman probably has greater. I mean, he's more of the scientist here. The statistician is like a mathematician, which is fine. Mathematicians are dope. But Hyman is the one who's actually used to using stats in experimental settings. So I tend to agree with Hyman. Marx also concluded in a 2001 paper that Stargate represented a series of closed off, flawed, non-validated, and non-replicated studies. And he concluded that remote viewing is nothing more than self-fulfilling objective delusion. So Marx is more crusty here, right? Hyman actually co-authored a thing, not here, but on the Gansfeld experiments, which we'll look at shortly. He's co-authored stuff with parapsychologists who believe in this stuff, saying like, okay, look, I disagree with what this guy thinks, but we both agree that to improve the methodology for these experiments, we should do these things. So he disagrees with parapsychologists, but he does still collaborate with them and try to help them do better science. Whereas Marx is just like, oh, these people are nuts, right? And I try not to be like that myself, personally speaking, because, you know, there was a time when I was younger when I was genuinely open-minded about these things. I thought to myself, like, I was probably a lot like the Rhines, where when I was young, a teenager reading books about the mind, and I thought to myself, like, I wonder if this stuff is real. I don't know. Seems like it may be, maybe not. I genuinely had an open mind about it. And as I learned more, I became more and more skeptical. But I don't want to be that kind of person who's just like, y'all are crazy. I don't want to do that. I don't want to be mean. I don't think people who believe in this stuff are delusional. I think that they are just reaching for the best explanation given their system of beliefs. This is why I brought Quine up the other day, but hey, not everybody's a Quinean, so don't worry about it if you're not. Whatever you believe about ESP or remote viewing, the American government did eventually conclude that they could not use ESP for spycraft, and no other country has successfully done it either. The Soviet Union didn't. I don't know who else would have experimented with this offhand. I know that the Americans did, and I know that the Soviets did. I don't know that anyone else has, but I wouldn't be surprised. You know, it's quite possible that the British tried it with MI6 or the Israelis with the Mossad. It's quite possible that some other big security service tried this, but nobody, to my knowledge, has ever been successful with it. But Russell Targ would continue his research on remote viewing despite these doubts. And he uses his research findings to argue that, as I mentioned earlier, everyone, or at least most people, have untapped psychic powers. It's kind of like, does anyone watch The Boys on Amazon? Oh, really? It's good. It's gory, but it's good. It's like superhero satire. All the superheroes, though, are like work for this big corporation, and the corporation actually creates superheroes by giving them this compound that was invented by like Nazi scientists back in the day. So people think that superheroes are like just appearing humans evolving. No, it's actually this corporation. They'll give you this shot when you're a kid and you'll get some superpowers or something, right? That's what this sounds like to me. And I know I just said I'm not trying to make fun of people or make them sound crazy, but that is what this sounds like to me, as a kind of like comic book scenario where, you know, if I had the right training or took the right drug, I might awaken some kind of power. And everybody has some kind of power. Maybe somebody's got the ability to read minds. Maybe somebody can do telekinesis. Somebody could shoot lasers out of their eyes or something. I don't know. But yeah, that's kind of what this sounds like. And this is similar to the psychical researchers and to the Rhines, especially the Rhines, who said that everybody probably has latent abilities in this regard. But it's the clatter of the conscious mind that suppresses these abilities. If we could just quiet down our conscious minds, some of the ways Targ suggests of doing this are like using meditation or like sensory deprivation. I guess you could try that. or perhaps certain pharmaceuticals. If we could do that, if we could quiet our minds this way, we could see into the far reaches of time and space through remote viewing, Targ says. I mean, some people do this. Some people do this without mistaking what they're seeing as what's out there in the world, right? Oh, really? That's
If you
interesting.
ever get a chance, do a sensory deprivation chamber, with the salt water, and they seal
Yes.
it, and you have you start to trip out within a minute or two.
I
It's
would love
absolutely
to.
insane.
I would love to
Yeah.
try it. I've always wanted to. I like to do. I like weird states of mind because I study the mind and I want to experience different states of mind. And sensory deprivation has always been up there on my list. The only one I'm not into is like meditating. I can't. I've tried. I just can't. I don't think it works for everybody. Like I get into a flow state when I read or work or like play music, and that's my meditation, but sensory deprivation sounds cool because I'm curious what my mind will do when there is no sensory input. I'm genuinely curious. Maybe I'll communicate with someone telepathically. I don't know. You never know.
You might believe it. Yeah, you might believe it.
Or you might believe it.
Sure.
Yeah. It's like some people. Okay, so I've never done this. Not that I have a problem with it, but it's just I'm on certain medications where this would not be a good idea. But some people take DMT, right? Dimethyltryptamine, which is a chemical that acts on your serotonin receptors. So it's what people call a psychedelic or a hallucinogen, or some people call it an entheogen, right? That was what was that? That's Terence McKenna, entheogens, right? The idea is that they put us in touch with the divine. And McKenna was famous for taking DMT and talking about these beings that he saw, which he called machine elves. They don't literally look like elves, at least so I hear. I've never talked to them. Yeah. Okay, no, we're not going to go Joe Rogan. We're going to keep it reasonable.
Okay.
We're going to keep it reasonable. We're not going down any Joe Rogan rabbit holes here. Don't worry. I'm keenly aware of the tightrope we're walking here.
Okay.
So yeah. So some people will say they might take DMT, and from what I understand, I haven't done DMT. And by the way, this is not meant to condone or condemn the use of drugs. I am not a medical doctor. I can tell you that, like, if you're gonna, no, like, this is serious stuff. If this is serious stuff, because some people hear me talk about this in class and they might want to go and try it, and I am not here to tell you to do that. Okay, that's not what I'm doing. I'm not telling you not to do it. I am telling you that you need to really, you need to be careful whatever you do. So that's what I'm saying. So disclaimer out of the way, but some people will have an experience with DMT, which I guess it does not last long, but it can be very intense, and they will see these elves. Now, I know that from my experiences with various other psychonautical adventures, that I do not mistake things in an altered state of mind, whether it's a lucid dream or a psychedelic experience or a flow state. I tend to still be able to maintain the boundaries between what's in my head and what's out there, but not everyone is like that, right? So some people will encounter these elves, these machine elves, and they believe that they are beings from another plane of existence or another planet or something, and that they're reaching out to us. Now, maybe, but I don't think so. I think that if I have some DMT and then I see some machine elves. That is an internally generated representation. But this is kind of what Targ is saying. If we could quiet our mind with sensory deprivation or psychopharmaceuticals or meditation, this is very much what he's saying. Daniel is absolutely right. You do need to be careful with psychedelics because there's a number of reasons why. First of all, I should say that I don't think there is evidence to show that many psychedelics are addictive or neurotoxic, and that's good. The one exception is probably MDMA, and that's because it's not really a psychedelic, it's stimulant, and it can actually be very neurotoxic. But psilocybin, LSD, DMT are probably not in themselves that harmful, except if you are on certain kinds of medication, right? If you are on any kind of antidepressant medication, do not, I repeat, do not, yes, if you're on SSRIs, do not do psychedelics. You run the risk of having a seizure. Same with MDMA. Now, I think that for LSD and for psilocybin and psilocin, SSRIs, you would have to do a heck of a lot of the drug to have an adverse effect, because SSRIs can blunt the effects of those psychedelics. But DMT is a different animal. People have seizures if they are on SSRIs and they take DMT, or if they have if they go on an ayahuasca retreat, which DMT is the active ingredient in ayahuasca. People will have seizures, and seizures can damage your brain. So do not mess around with this stuff if you are not if you're mentally unprepared, or if you are on a type of medication where there will be serious risks. Just don't. It's not worth it. You know, brain damage is never worth it. So yeah. So that's all I'll say about that. See, Joe Rogan, he would just tell you just to take all of the mushrooms, right? I'm not going to do that. And then he'd tell you to take some alpha brain. Is that what it's called? He's got his like protein powder, and it's called alpha brain. Like, oh my God. Like sometimes I see clips of Joe Rogan and I'm like, we're doomed. We're just doomed. Anyway,
It's
let's
so alarming how popular he is. Yeah.
It's like Alex Jones.
Yeah.
You know, like you know, and that was the first time I had seen that I saw red flags about Joe Rogan, was way back in the day, even before he had a podcast. He was with Alex Jones in clips, and I'm like, this guy's friends with that guy? He's nuts. Like, so I've known for years. But anyway, yeah, let's talk about the Ganzfeld experiment, which is something we mentioned in one of our earlier lectures. The greatest controversy, writes Blackmore, in this whole ESP research field concerns the Ganzfeld experimental paradigm. Ganzfeld is German. It means whole field. What is the whole field? Well, they'll take your these ping pong balls, like this is a ping pong ball cut in half and just placed over your eyes, and red light is played is broadcast in the room, and you've got some noise in the headphones, probably white noise or ocean sounds or something relaxing. The reason it's red light is because red light doesn't dilate your pupils. So you can have this uniform pink field in your visual field with white noise in your ears, and that is the Ganzfeld. That's what we call the Ganzfeld. Parapsychologists claim that the Ganzfeld produces a psi-conducive state of consciousness. So I guess the idea here is kind of similar to sensory deprivation, except you're not taking away all sensory input besides like the feeling of the water or the sound of the water. You're getting sounds, you're getting a uniform visual field. So it's quite similar. Not exactly the same, but quite similar. So the participant will sit in the Ganzfeld and report everything she experiences. So probably, you know, you might experience some things that are a little similar to what people report experiencing with sensory deprivation. Maybe you'll hear some things, see some things, you know, it's kind of like an altered state of consciousness. So, you know, that's why I think that parapsychologists claim that it's a psi-conducive state. I don't agree with them when they say that, but that's why I think that's why they make that claim. Now, everything the participant reports is recorded and it's examined later. The sender, while this is going on, is sitting in a remote location, and the sender is viewing a picture or a video and trying to send it to the person in the GANs field, right? Same with the dream studies. So the dream, I'm in a dream, somebody's trying to send me the target. Here I'm in the Gansfeld, someone is sending me the target. Be like if I was in a sensory deprivation chamber and somebody tried to send me a target. So I try to pick what the sender sent, and sometimes they'll even bring in an independent judge who will look over the transcript of what I've reported while in the Gansfeld and note possible reports of things that might correspond with the target that was being sent to me while I was in the Gansfeld. Now, a lot of researchers claim that they've had successful results this way. They even claim that the Gansfeld provides a reliable means for replication, but a lot of critics disagree. And why is this problematic? I mean, really, okay, so I'm in the Gansfeld, I'm saying what I'm seeing, like, oh, I'm hearing sounds, I see this, blah, blah, blah. Judge looks at that later, I match up the target, and I match the target, say the target is a guitar, and I pick it out on the basis of the fact that I just heard music in the Gansfeld. I started to hallucinate music in the white noise. Now, I listen to a lot of music with guitar in it, and maybe that's why I matched up the guitar. But is that reliable proof that the target was actually communicated to me? Or is that just because that when my mind wanders, I tend to go to music, and when I go to music, it tends to have guitar in it because I play the guitar, as you can see, and it really is just coincidence, right? That's another experimental confound. How about something called remote staring? This one is something that I think initially a lot of people think, oh, there might be something to this. So what is remote staring? Well, it's a technique that some parapsychologists allege. Oh, can't get myself out of the way here. Oh, there we go. It's a technique that some parapsychologists allege will show that people can tell when someone's staring at them. You know, you have a feeling, we all have this feeling, sometimes we experience this, where it feels like we're being watched. And maybe we actually are being watched. This is the idea behind remote staring. It's the idea that we can feel when we're being watched. And being watched is weird, right? When you don't know you're being watched and you realize you're being watched. There's an example that my old my supervisor Heidi Maybaum used to use all the time, called the seeing eye of the other, and this actually comes from Jean-Paul Sartre. Yeah. Good night, Moon. Good night, Cesis. Put your tinfoil hat on, maybe. No. So you know, Sartre had this idea where, like, you imagine you're looking the Panopticon. Yeah. Imagine you are looking through you're spying on somebody. Like maybe you're peeping through a keyhole and you're spying on somebody. Maybe maybe you're not trying to be nefarious. It's not like they're taking their clothes off or anything and you're peeping Tom. It's not like that, but maybe you're just spying on somebody. And then you realize that someone is watching you spy on them. and you're like, oh, right. So being watched can feel a little bit freaky. I think this is also why that photograph illusion is pretty freaky as well. Where the photograph or the painting or the effigy in the eye seem to follow you. That's another reason why that's creepy. Not only is this an inanimate object that appears animate by virtue of this illusion, but also it's weird being watched like that, right? I mean, people, that's why staring is rude. People say don't stare, because when people stare, like if I'm just staring like this, that's creepy. If I stare like this, it's like, what, am I angry? You know, am I going to attack you? You know, so like, yeah, I see that. It's weird. I'm going to yep, there, problem solved. So that's remote staring. The idea that we can sense when someone is staring at us. And Rupert Sheldrake conducts experiment on remote staring, and he uses video cameras and online methods to try and avoid the sensory leakage. Now, he claims that there is enough evidence for this phenomenon that we conclude that it's a real, legitimate phenomenon, and that this evidence suggests people possess a type of perceptual field that extends beyond the head. This is more compatible, he says, with theories of vision that involve both inward and outward movements of influence. This is like Aristotelian theories of vision. Like, this is like so old. This is backwards, I say. He's talking about the idea that not light doesn't just come into the eyes, but some kind of psychical force goes out and is detected by the one who's being observed. This is, I mean, we look, vision is one of the most well-studied neural systems that we have. We probably know, I mean, we know so much about vision. This is not how it works. I mean, we can just say, it's some of this stuff we can, I think, remain a little bit agnostic about, like, you know, brainwaves, dreams, altered states, sensory deprivation, maybe. But with vision, we know so much about how vision works that I think we can rule this out. It just doesn't make sense. It's not parsimonious. It violates Occam's razor, because we've already got such a big, successful theory of vision. Why would we get rid of that or alter it by adding a psychical force that extends out? So that's why critics accuse him of misunderstanding theories of vision. They also accuse him of mistaking signal for noise. This should be mistaking noise for signal. I don't know why it keeps repeating like this, but we'll talk about this in a moment. Pareidolia is an example of this, when we mistake noise as a meaningful signal. And this can happen in the interpretation of results too. We might think that noise is actually a significant signal that bears upon our hypothesis, and whether we can reject or not reject our hypothesis. So, all right, now the evidence for ESP, I'll slide over here. The evidence for ESP seems lacking. But what if one day an experiment did produce reliable evidence for it? It would be pretty crazy if it did. And I don't mean crazy as in insane. I mean, it would be a big freaking deal. It would mean many things for science. It would illustrate the power of consciousness, for example. But Blackmore says, you know, even if we grant that there are successful experiments investigating ESP and you know, obtaining successful results, the evidence still doesn't seem to be in favor of conscious control over these abilities. So when we're doing an ESP experiment, whether we're using Zener cards or some Otto Gansfeld experiments or PK, well, not PK, because we haven't really talked about that yet. The participants aren't aware of which guesses they get right and which they aren't. So even if ESP exists, it doesn't seem like we can control it consciously. We can't really exercise voluntary control over it. It would be kind of like Dan said earlier, right? Like maybe if it exists, it's something that only kicks in like dire situations, right? But even then, even if that's true, ESP it kind of makes ESP seem like not a big deal. And we still have the challenge of explaining it, even if it's true that it's involuntary and only kicks in when it's like fight, flight, freeze, or scoodly poop. Doesn't mean that we don't have to explain it, how it works, right? A lot of people would claim that this also supports a dualistic view of nature. If we discovered ESP, like I said, we'd still have to explain it naturalistically. And so long as we fail to do that, people are going to claim that it's non-naturalistic, that it's supernatural or paranormal. They're probably going to claim it's substance dualism. They might claim it's property dualism. I mean, there's a school of thought on this. Like we've talked about physicalism, which is materialism. The only thing that exists is the physical. It's substance monism. Then there's substance dualism. So we have two substances. We have matter and mind. But there's also property dualism. And some like panpsychics are property dualists. Panpsychism is, it's not like psychism as in psychic, it's psychism as in just mind. And panpsychism is the idea that everything in the universe is just a little bit mental or a little bit conscious. So mental properties and physical properties they're dual properties of the stuff that exists. So that's what a panpsychist would say. So someone who believes in this stuff is probably going to be some kind of dualist, either a property dualist, maybe, or either a substance dualist, maybe a property dualist. And I think it's a slippery slope from substance dualism to ghosts. And that's why Gilbert Ryle famously, said of Cartesian philosophy that there is no ghost in the machine, right? There is no immaterial soul in your material body. That's what he meant by that. No ghost in the machine. That's Gilbert Ryle. He was Daniel Dennett's PhD supervisor at Oxford. So that's kind of cool little bit of trivia for you. All right. Now, I've kind of mentioned this already, but we pointed out that some of these methods involve altered states of consciousness, right? The Ganzfeld experiment, just get myself out of the way here, is a mild altered state. And this is interesting to me because in many cultures, altered states are induced to produce spiritual experiences, right? I mentioned ayahuasca earlier. Now, it's interesting. This has kind of been appropriated by Western tourists. Tourists will go to South America on these ayahuasca retreats, or even in America, in some places they do them, and they'll have a shaman there, and the people, the participants will drink the ayahuasca and have an experience. But traditionally, that's actually not how it works. Traditionally, what happens is if I'm a member of the community, then I have to go to the medicine man. I have to go to the witch doctor, right? I go to the guy, the shaman, whatever they call him. I go to him with my problem. He takes the ayahuasca and he has the vision. And then he or she tells me what they saw and what it means and what I need to do. So these ayahuasca retreats are actually like kind of like an example of cultural appropriation. It's people trying to make a buck. But it's not like that everywhere. I mean, some Native American tribes use peyote. Peyote is another plant alkaloid, and people all over the world have used magic mushrooms. In fact, when they're used in the context of spiritual experiences, they're often called sacred mushrooms. But psilocybin-containing mushrooms grow all over the world. They are more common in tropical and subtropical areas, but they grow all over the world. They even grow in temperate areas. So, but of course, again, don't go out picking mushrooms. You eat the wrong mushroom, it could kill you. Okay, so just don't go out foraging and expect to have a wonderful time. You need to forage with an expert. That goes for edible mushrooms or spiritual mushrooms. Yeah, what about Mike Tyson? Didn't he do lick some toads or something? And now
there's
he's
like
all...
a video of him like gorging like magic mushrooms. I forget where I saw it, and he's like just like going to town on this like bag of magic mushrooms. It's hilarious.
Oh my God. Oh, that's crazy. I
Yeah.
knew that Mike Tyson, well, he's such a weird dude. Like, I mean,
He's strange guy.
what's that?
He's like a strange kind of guy, you know.
He is a strange man. Like, I mean, well, he used to be, when he was boxing, he was insanely violent.
Oh
right?
yeah, for sure.
Insanely violent. He served time in prison because of a rape charge. And then when he got out of prison, he got into hallucinogens and just became this like almost like this teddy bear kind of figure. And now he's getting into the conspiracy stuff, where he's meeting up with QAnon people and
Yeah.
I mean, weird dude. But another funny story along those lines is Paul Stamets's first trip. He talks about it in that film, Fantastic Fungi. Paul Stamets is that mycologist. If you don't know Paul Stamets, you got to look up Paul Stamets. Yeah, he got stuck in a tree. The way he tells the story is that he gets like a bag of mushrooms from his brother, and it's like about a quarter of an ounce, 7 grams. That's a lot of mushrooms. That's a lot. And Paul Stamets doesn't know how much to eat, so he eats the whole bag, and that's a lot. Okay, like that's a lot. Trust me on that one. So he climbs this tree, and a thunderstorm comes. And it's raining and there's lightning, and he describes these geometric patterns that he's seeing. And it was like, wow, that sounds so far out. And the story goes that he got home, and he had a speech impediment at the time. And he got home and kind of meditated as he went to sleep while he was riding the tail end of this trip, where he claimed that I want to speak better. I don't want to stutter. Yeah, all while he's up in the tree in the middle of a lightning storm. Like, amazing experience that must have been. And then he goes home and he's doing this meditation thing. And the next day his stutter's gone. Now, I know this is self-report, so we have to take it with a grain of salt. But there is evidence now that one of the things that psilocybin does is rapidly rewire memory traces in the brain. That's why it's used. That's why it's been approved for use for like therapy for like post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's not, I mean, yes, it's an extraordinary claim, but it's not implausible. So that's very interesting. So maybe we need to quiet the mind to awaken our psychic abilities, and we can use a psychic state, or we can use altered states to do this. But this is the thing that Blackmore points out, is that it's never really been shown that people who are in altered states do better in the experiments that we've looked at. You know, maybe people in the Ganzfeld have a certain level of hits, but if we further alter their state, maybe we give them a microdose of psilocin or LSD or something, they don't do any better, right? So, so maybe this connection between ESP and consciousness and altered consciousness that's made by parapsychologists actually betrays some of their assumptions about how consciousness works, namely their dualistic assumptions, right? So, anyway, if you're curious to read more about the Ganzfeld experiments, check out 21.6 in the chapter I've shared from Blackmore. That's it for ESP. Let's talk about psychokinesis briefly before we wrap up. Coffee. So again, psychokinesis refers to the ability to affect objects in the environment or processes in the environment without using the usual sensory motor means. So ordinarily, I just reach out and pick stuff up. Whoa, I'm moving things with my mind. See, I'm moving my arm, which is moving this. Wow, it's cool. But psychokinesis would be like, levitating objects. Of course, research on PK doesn't usually focus on things that are that spectacular. It focuses on like dice rolls, random number generators, maybe moving tables, bending spoons, of course, right? But meta-analyses of studies of PK, including one on the effects of consciousness on the fall of dice, don't show significant overall effects. By the way, what is a meta-analysis? Is anyone familiar with the idea of a meta-analysis? Well, a meta-analysis is like a study that looks at a whole bunch of other studies. It's meta after analysis. So like a meta, an analysis of a bunch of analyses. So we'll collect, 20 studies on PK and dice rolls, and we'll analyze those analyses to see if there's actually anything going on. And meta-analyses are good for certain things. Meta-analyses are good for sort of telling us what we can do better in future and revealing problems. You can't really use a meta-analysis to prove anything because it's not testing like a specific hypothesis. It's looking at the results of other hypothesis testing. So you have to be careful how you use a meta-analysis. But a lot of meta-analyses do not show significant effects. When we collect up all these studies and look for the overall effect, it's usually negligible. Now, excuse me. Most modern day research on psychokinesis examines what we call micro PK, and this is the extrasensory motor ability to influence microscopic systems, probabilistic systems, quantum mechanical systems, right? And this began in the 1970s. The first experiments were actually done with oscilloscopes. Maybe you've seen these, a little green screen with a dot that will rotate around it. That's an oscilloscope. Now, the lights can be controlled by random processes like radioactive decay. So if we have a little bit of strontium-90, it's an unstable element, which means it's going to lose particles, right? It's going to lose, I forget what it's going to lose, probably some electrons or something, some protons. It's going to lose some material, okay? That's going to be radioactive. And when anything is radioactive, it's because it's losing particles, subatomic particles that make it up, because it's not stable. The electrical charges don't balance. Let's not get into the physics of it, but so they'll use things that are pseudo-random or truly random. And a lot of this is based on quantum mechanics and what we call the measurement problem. Now, here's where we really have to be careful, and I'll explain why. On micro PK that appeals to like quantum mechanical theories, psi isn't a force, right? It's not a force like inertia is a force in classical physics, right? Or the way gravity is a force. It's not a force like that. What it is a shift in quantum probabilities caused by observing the observation of a conscious agent. Who's heard of the double slit experiment? Oh, really? Well, if you've not heard of it, then you must check out this video. I'll post it to the Discord server after class. Daniel's heard of it. Daniel, do you want to tell us about the double slit experiment?
I always forget which one it is amongst all the experiments that sort of are just weird quantum things. but it's to do with testing the idea that a light is a particle or a wave, I believe, right?
That's right. In physics, and this is probably the one thing about this experiment that is not in dispute, is that light can be a particle or a wave. Newton thought light was a particle. Christian Huygens, a Dutch astronomer who was his contemporary, famously argued that it was a wave. And we say nowadays that light is a wave and a particle. Does that mean, like, are we scientific realists? Does that mean that wave is literally a light and a particle? No, it means that light can be explained in formula that use light as a particle and as a wave. It means that both of those types of explanations work. So here's the thing about the double slit experiment. The double slit experiment has 2 slits, and we can shoot light through it. We could shoot photons through it. We could shoot electrons through it. We just have to shoot some kind of subatomic particle through it. Now, when we do this without observing, what we get is a pattern that looks, let's see if I can draw a tiny picture. We get a pattern that looks, like this, kind of like the number 11. We get a pattern that looks a bit like that, where the photons are just going through the slits, right? But if we observe, we get the interference pattern of a wave, which I'm drawing this, my pen is running out, but an interference pattern for a wave looks kind of like thick line in the middle, thin lines to the side, even thinner lines. And these would be where the crests of the wave are actually crossing one another. That's why it's called an interference pattern. So those are like the nodes. What you're seeing where the particles are lining are like the sort of harmonic nodes, of the wave. So that's the double slit experiment. And there's a huge debate on what this means, and it's a real debate in quantum physics. Why is it that when the particles are not observed, they go through or no, I've got it backwards. I've got this backwards. The wave is when they're not observed. They just go through, light behaves as a wave. When it's observed, then you get the particles either going through one slit or the other. So they don't behave like a wave when they're observed. They behave like a particle when they're observed. And that is like, this is a real mystery. We don't know why. But it depends what we mean by observe, right? People think like, okay, if I'm a conscious experimenter and I observe this, my consciousness is affecting it. And it's causing a collapse of the wave function, so that the particle, if it's unobserved, it's a wave and it goes through both slits. But if it's observed, it collapses the wave function, it goes through one slit or the other. Okay, that's one explanation. But is it consciousness that's doing that, or is it just the act of measuring it? Because in order to measure anything, you have to affect it with something else, right? So in that act, it's not like information is just passively entering my eyes. I'm using scientific instruments which affect the process that I'm observing. And that may also explain the different results here. But some claim that if this so-called measurement problem is explicable by the power of consciousness, maybe this will explain micro PK. And some actually claim that this was confirmed in an experiment that used pre-recorded targets. Random numbers in this experiment were converted into clicks that could appear on the left and right channels of an audio tape. So it's a bit like the double slit experiment. It could go through the right or the left slit. Well, here these clicks could be recorded to the right or left channel, and it's random. It's a random process because they're radioactively generated. So it is truly random. Then the tapes were played and the participants had to influence the clicks to one channel or another. I guess you might want to think here of Schrodinger's cat. That's another quantum physics thought experiment. The double slit experiment is a real empirical experiment. Schrodinger's cat is a thought experiment Erwin Schrödinger came up with it, a famous physicist, and you can watch a video about it here. Who knows about Schrodinger's cat?
Isn't it the cat in the box, if it exists or not? Sorry, Daniel, I interrupted.
Not if it exists or not, but whether it's dead or alive.
All right.
Yeah. Daniel, go ahead. Do you want to add to that description?
No, that's pretty much it. Well, the idea is they also have like a radioactive clock that could burst and kill the cat or not kill the cat. And
That's right.
Because it's radioactive, we don't know what it does that.
Yeah. Now, what Schrodinger was saying was not that the cat would literally be dead or alive at the same time until it's observed. He was not saying that. He was trying to give an example, a macroscopic scale example of the weird stuff that seems to happen at the quantum level, because quantum physics is all about very, very small stuff. The subatomic, right? Atomic and subatomic. Once you get atomic or higher, you're into chemistry, right? And classical physics. But subatomic, we're dealing with the quantum. And then, of course, for very large things, very fast moving things, very massive things, we're talking general and special relativity. So the idea here behind Schrodinger's cat is to kind of give you some insight into the double slit experiment. When it's not observed, light is a wave and it goes through both slits at the same time. Schrodinger's cat, if it's not observed, is dead and alive at the same time. Now, this would not happen if you set this up at this scale with a cat. It's just not how it works. It's just meant to give you an example that you can digest, because you understand cats, you understand opening boxes. We don't understand radioactive decay. At least, we don't grok it like we grok everyday stuff in middle world, right? So that's what Schrodinger's cat is trying to explain. And this tape is like this, right? We're trying to the clicks might be on both channels until they're listened to, and we're trying to influence which channel they go to. Schrodinger's cat is dead or alive. The click is on the right or the left channel. That's what these experiments are trying to do. Oh, grok. Grok is a term from Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. It's a term that I think the Martians use. And what it means is that, like, I grasp it, I get it intuitively. I understand it. I don't have to think about it. I get it. I grok it. So in Leonard Susskind's book about physics, I think it's called The Black Hole War. Do I not have that book anymore? I don't think I have that book anymore. But anyway, Klingon, yes. For grok, it sounds like could be a Klingon word. But grok, yeah, when you grok something, you get it. And Leonard Susskind and other physicists use this term from science fiction to kind of explain how we grasp things. We all have an intuitive, innate folk physics that develops where we can all understand how objects will interact with each other at the level of spatial and temporal granularity that we live in. So I can understand perfectly well how billiard balls will behave on the table, what will happen if I drop something off a tall building. I can understand these things pretty well because that's the environment that my brain and your brain evolved in. But when it comes to orbiting a black hole or traveling close to the speed of light or the double slit experiment, we don't grok this because things behave so differently at this level of spatial and temporal granularity. If I orbit a body with very high gravity, like a black hole, Or if I approach the speed of light, what happens? Well, yes, I get spaghettified if I get to a black hole. To the person looking at me, but to me, time seems to stop, right? I slow down. The rest of the universe goes by infinitely quickly, but time seems to slow down for me. Same if I travel speed of light. If I go to the speed of light, or even just half the speed of light, and I leave my twin brother on planet Earth and I travel and I come back, I will be a year older. My brother could be dead, right? Time dilation. We don't grok that. Like, we're like, okay, yeah, sure, that's what happens. Einstein showed that with his formula, but we don't grok it. That's like, what? How? Like that doesn't make the same kind of sense as billiard balls or throwing things off buildings does, right? Same with quantum stuff. So that's what grok means. We grok classical physics. We do not grok quantum physics. And like Richard Feynman famously said, and I'm paraphrasing here, anyone who says they understands quantum physics doesn't understand quantum physics. No one understands quantum physics. We can do the math, but what the math tells us is just like so far outside of our experience of the world that some people don't believe it. So, yeah. So anyway, the tapes are stored for a time here, and then they're listened to. And it was claimed that there's an excess of clicks on the channel that the participants willed the clicks to. So they affected somehow the clicks is the idea. And in some experiments, the participants were given the targets more than once. And here they found a retro PK effect, a bit like what Soul claimed to have found with his ESP studies. But of course, we know that Soul was fudging the numbers. So anyway, watch this video. This is from Jim Al-Khalil, I think, a physicist at Oxford. And he's a perfect example of a methodological naturalist, because he's a really great physicist and he's also a practicing Muslim. So he's religious. He goes to mosque, he prays 5 times a day, he fasts during Ramadan, but he also figures out the mysteries of the universe. So for him, the natural and the supernatural are just like non-overlapping magisteria. That's methodological naturalism, right? So that's fine, right? Okay, next slide. Dick Bierman, a Dutch parapsychologist, used a very similar method to test the subjective reduction interpretation of the measurement problem. The idea that consciousness collapses the wave function. Not even that observation collapses the wave function, that consciousness, because observation doesn't have to be done by a conscious being. In fact, it can't be in this case, because we're talking about stuff that we can't see. You can't see single electrons or single photons. You can't see them unless you have a cloud chamber. Then you could see them, or you could see their effects. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, like we're just only recently, only within the last few years, we confirmed the existence of gravitational waves. And if light can be a wave or a particle, can gravity be a wave or a particle? Well, if there are gravitational waves, then are there gravitons? Right? Like, it's so cool. It is crazy to think about. You're absolutely right. But the subjective reduction interpretation here is the idea that consciousness is what collapses the wave function, not even just measuring with an instrument, which, by the way, will also produce the weird results of the double slit experiment. Now, I've got to say, okay, first of all, the reason why we have to be careful with quantum physics, and again, I don't understand quantum mechanics. I'm not a physicist. I've got the basics, I know some basics, but I'm not a physicist. And even physicists don't understand quantum mechanics, according to Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winning physicist. So What the important thing to know here is that there are like over a dozen different interpretations of what the formulae in quantum mechanics mean, right? There's the Copenhagen interpretation. That's probably one of the main ones. The Copenhagen interpretation says that, yeah, quantum mechanics is weird, but quantum mechanics doesn't actually tell us what the quantum world is like. They're just tools that have very successful predictive power, right? So forget about light being, is it a particle, is it a wave, or it is both? We can't know. It's like some kind of Kantian noumenal thing that we can't know. All we can do is try and explain how it works using these formula. Then there's the many worlds interpretation. Everyone knows this one. What's the many worlds interpretation?
We're talking like Interstellar, like the movie. No,
no, not exactly. I'm thinking more like Rick and Morty.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah,
Different
Daniel.
universes.
Yeah, Daniel, go ahead.
I think the idea is that like basically everything that could happen in such a situation does happen, just doesn't necessarily happen in this universe.
That's right. That's the many worlds interpretation. And that's the other big one, is that for every possible outcome, another universe is created. So that's the many world interpretation. And there are many other interpretations as well, including the subjective reduction interpretation, which gets into what I think of as quantum mysticism, which is the idea that it's actually consciousness that collapses the wave function. Oh, sorry, my sister's calling. So consciousness collapses the wave function, which means that it's consciousness that causes that split, right? Sorry guys. One sec. Hello? Hey, I'm teaching a class. Yeah, okay. Can I call you right back? Soon. 10-15 minutes. Okay, I'll call you back in 20. Before then. Okay, bye. Sorry, my sister's got all these. My sister has this kind of like rescue farm where she rescues animals and stuff, and she's got this new animal. She wants to tell me about it. She's really excited about it. So, okay, so consciousness collapses the wave functions. Wave functions are probabilities that are not actual until they're measured or observed. So the idea is that it's consciousness is the key, and that's why I think this gets into quantum mysticism. But anyway, Dick Bierman recorded these auditory invoked potentials from participants. These would be, oh, unfortunately, it's not Bigfoot. No, it's actually a caiman that I think she rescued from an alligator farm. Yeah. People have alligator farms now. Yeah, and they'll grow them for eating and for making bags and stuff like alligator leather. So I think she rescued this one from a farm like that. Okay, so Bierman recorded audio invoked potentials from participants. So they're listening, and he's recording audio evoked potentials, which are, again, a type of event-related potential that's recorded at the scalp using electroencephalography while they listen to these unobserved decay events that were recorded. And he compared these to responses that were previously observed, already collapsed into a singular state because they had been observed. They wouldn't be existing in superposition. That's the idea. That's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, is because of quantum superposition. Quantum particles can exist in more than one place at a time, which is really wacky. And moreover, there's only so much we can know about particles because of a measurement problem. We could know the spin or the direction or the charge, but we can't know all of them. Because as soon as we measure one, we affect one of the other things, and that's why quantum mechanics is all probabilistic and uncertain, right? Now, Bierman's studies showed a significant difference in brain responses between observed and unobserved tapes, but others failed to replicate these results. Again, replication comes back to bite people in the butt. So same with PAIR, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, where Robert Jan and colleagues had collected massive amounts of data with quantum mechanical random number generators. And the data were automatically recorded, as were the direction of aim of the particles, which was counterbalanced. They used baseline conditions as a control. This has been done by many other researchers in the meantime as well. Then they used meta-analysis to look at their studies, all the other studies they collected, to see if there's any effect of quantum PK. And their first major meta-analysis, which used 600, almost 600 of these studies, found chance results on control conditions, but deviations from chance and experimental conditions. And they were statistically significant, so that's a good sign. That means maybe something's going on. The effect size was small, yes, but it was consistent throughout the database, and it did not seem to have been caused by any methodological flaws or experimenter bias, probably because so many people were involved, and a lot of it was also automated to kind of avoid human error. Now, the authors of the analysis interpreted their results as evidence for consciousness-related anomalies in random physical systems. And they also concluded that consciousness can affect the material world based on these results. So the power of consciousness. But a different meta-analysis written by different authors revealed different results. It showed a smaller effect size, and that the differences between the experiment and control conditions could be reduced to chance level by, I forget the exact number, but just introducing maybe 5 more non-significant studies into this pool of studies, they would have reduced everything to chance overall. Now, I mean, I guess the main takeaway here is that a lot of parapsychologists who are interested in studying PK, or who find the evidence, like the lines of evidence we've been looking at here, convincing, they claim that consciousness is involved. Some of them are dualists, and they're open about that. They're like, I'm a dualist, I'm a substance dualist, or I'm a property dualist, or I'm a panpsychist. You know, they don't believe the mind is physical. They believe that consciousness is like a force, an extra physical force in the universe. I think that introduces or reintroduces the mind-body interaction problem, which is the exact same problem that René Descartes faced. Right? If the mind is an immaterial substance and the body is material, how on earth do they interact with one another? Well, Descartes said, well, the pineal gland, obviously, but still, that doesn't explain it. You've still got an immaterial substance. How does it interact with the pineal gland, right? That's just kicking the can down the road. So I think this introduces a similar problem. Others appeal to quantum mechanics, as we've seen. They claim that consciousness may be a result of quantum mechanical processes as well. But I'm skeptical about this. Radden is one of these thinkers. You know, he says quantum entanglement might explain ESP and PK. Maybe there's quantum entanglement between minds, and that explains the transference of thoughts from one brain to another, if that happens. But there's not a lot of experimental literature that does a very good job of explaining the connection between quantum mechanics and consciousness. In fact, a lot of theories of quantum consciousness make predictions that we have already shown to be false. So I, like a lot of other thinkers, I tend to say that if we try and explain consciousness or ESP with quantum mechanics, what we're really doing is swapping one mystery for another mystery. So we're not really explaining anything, because we don't really understand quantum mechanics anyway. And, you know, we also, in those areas where we can derive predictions about quantum mechanical processes and how they work in our neural systems, we can test those, and often we find that they're wrong. So we're switching one mystery for another. That's not good. Oh, what's happening here? Yes. Animism. Remember animism? The omnipotence of thought, the power of consciousness. That's kind of what we've been dancing around this whole time. An animistic tendency of people to attribute strange coincidences, the power of thought, and its ability to affect reality. Blackmore doesn't get into too much detail here, but I really do think this is worth keeping in mind. Maybe coincidence can explain why some people believe in psi, right? For some reason or another, some people are bad with evaluating probabilities and coincidences and stuff like that. Maybe this is what happened with the person who had the dream of that car crash victim, right? They would have attributed that as a precognitive dream, perhaps. But maybe they did that because they are not a mathematician and they don't know the probability that any one person in the UK having that dream, is what it is. That at least one person has this experience happen to them every 2 weeks in the United Kingdom, right? They're not a mathematician. No big deal. It has been found actually that people who are better at making probability judgments, so judging the likelihood of something having happened or will happen, are actually less likely to report psychic experiences, and they're less likely to report believing in the paranormal. And I can confirm this. I'm no mathematician, but I'm actually, I tend to think things through pretty thoroughly. I tend to be critical and skeptical, and I try to keep my eyes out for my cognitive biases and when I make a logical fallacy or an error of reason. And I don't believe in the paranormal. But a lot of the people that I know that do are, they're no statisticians. I'll just say that. And that's not meant to be like a personal attack. It's just people are bad at reasoning about probabilities. Even people who are good at reasoning about them are like not that good, right? It's kind of like how even the good driver will never be as good as a self-driving car. Even the best probability guy will never be as good as a calculator. So, but this seems to be true. People who believe in the paranormal are not as good at making probability judgments, and they're also more likely to report seeing images in ambiguous figures or meaningful signals in meaningless noise. They're more likely to engage in what we will call apophenia, which I will talk about in a moment. Of course, there's also cognitive biases at play. Confirmation bias is probably the big one, right? This is a bias toward information that supports your worldview, that supports your prior beliefs and your prior values. This is characterized by Michael Shermer as remembering the hits and forgetting the misses when it comes to paranormal stuff. Like an example of somebody who believes in ghosts and hears something weird in her house. She attributes it to a haunting, perhaps. And even if you were to later show her that, oh, actually, this window was open, or you've got a draft here, or here's an explanation, they might forget that and just remember the experience of thinking there's a ghost, right? Or if you go to a medium to get or like a psychic to get a psychic reading, and the psychic is doing some cold reading and you offer some information, and they say, oh, well, I see this and I see that. You remember the stuff that the psychic got right, but you forget everything they got wrong, because that stuff doesn't support your worldview that psychics exist and that the spirits of the dead are out there and can communicate with people, right? So that's confirmation bias, and scientists are also subject to this. That's why we have science. Science is, we have peer review, we have rigorous controls, This is all to make sure that scientists' biases don't screw everything up, right? And as I mentioned earlier, there's apophenia, right? Apophenia is a tendency to perceive meaningful connections between things that are actually unrelated. One example is when I was a little kid, I used to watch Wheel of Fortune. And, I'd see people spinning the wheel and they'd go, come on, big money. They say something when they spin the wheel to try to get that wheel to land on a thing where they'll win some money, right? And if the wheel lands on, I don't know, $10,000 or whatever, I always wondered, do those people think they made that happen? Right? Same with cheering for your favorite sports team. If you cheer harder, maybe they'll win. Maybe, right? Strange coincidences again, right? Maybe you keep seeing the same number over and over again, just by coincidence, but you attribute some kind of significance to it. That would be apophenia. Or those ghost hunters. Now we're not talking about ghost hunting yet. We will next time. But these ghost hunters will go into a purportedly haunted location and record noise, and then they'll listen back and they might hear something, hear a voice. Now, it's not really a voice, it's just background noise. And they're mistaking that noise for signal due to apophenia. One particular kind of apophenia is pareidolia. And that's when we perceive, like I just said, meaningful information in sounds, images, in random stimuli. This is actually my own. I had to take a picture of this. I've kept this on my phone for this exact purpose. This is pareidolia. I had my frying pan soaking after making dinner, and I came back and the bubbles had just popped in this weird winky face. And I thought, that's a great example of pareidolia. It's kind of like when people say they see, there was one example of a grilled cheese sandwich that had the face of Jesus. And you see this on eBay. Go on eBay and just look for food that looks like Jesus. Yeah, or the Virgin Mary. You'll find potato chips that look like Jesus. You'll find grilled cheese sandwiches. This is pareidolia. I had the most horrible idea when I was studying business before I got into philosophy for an invention. It would be the miraculous grilled cheese sandwich griddle. And it would allow you to have Jesus on your grilled cheese every time. But I didn't think it would sell because, people don't care about that. It would be like a novelty. But people want something to be actually miraculous. Like you flip the sandwich over in your pan and see an image of who you think is Jesus Christ. That's going to be pretty surprising and spectacular to you. Mateo, go ahead.
Yeah, like I remember a couple of years ago there was like a Dorito that was like in the shape of the Pope's hat or whatever that was. Or something like that.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, and that's all examples of pareidolia, which is an example of apophenia, seeing patterns, meaningful connections where it's really just random information. And hey, our brains do this because we need to find patterns. We need to survive. That's why our brains do this. But sometimes we get false positives, like you have this is not a face, this is just bubbles. But if you want, just Google funny cases of pareidolia. There's some hilarious stuff out, like laugh out loud, funny looking stuff out there. That's just our brains putting this there. So it's good stuff. So anyway, Blackmore concludes that the paranormal probably doesn't exist, at least not PK or ESP. Even if they do exist, they're probably very weak. And we probably can't consciously control them. So that's a bummer, I guess. But, if we reject the paranormal, Does that mean we have to reject other things like spiritual or religious experiences? Blackmore doesn't think so, and neither do I. But this is a discussion that she has later in the book, and it's maybe something we can talk about during our class discussion, either on skepticism or belief and belief change. I think we'll get back into this stuff. But I certainly don't think that just because ESP or PK doesn't exist that you should, if you are spiritual or religious, that you should stop being that way. I mean, I'm an atheist myself, but I understand that religion and spirituality fill very, very like fundamental human needs. These are human things we do. I never got the whole idea that, like Dawkins and the whole God delusion idea, I never got that. Like, oh, it's all just irrationality and delusional thinking. And I'm like, well, some of it is. But when you get down to it, I mean, religion evolved for a reason. Maybe it is maladaptive, but it's not craziness. It's not insanity. So, you know, if your religious or spiritual tradition tells you that some supernatural things exist, cool, man. I'm not here to tell you that they don't. But I will tell you that science cannot study them, because we got to be because science is naturalistic. So, but one thing Blackmore does point out here is that, like, well, when it comes to some paranormal stuff that's dressed up as spiritual, well, what's so spiritual about it? What's so spiritual about bending a spoon with your mind, right? I don't know. Well, to wrap up, it seems like the power of consciousness, that's what these parapsychologists really want to study, the power of consciousness, magical thinking. But that, of course, implies a non-naturalistic way of looking at the world, you know, a dualist way of looking at the world, which means that parapsychology it seems to be distancing itself from other naturalistic or materialist accounts of the mind, and that's a problem. That is why it is a pseudoscience, and I don't think it started out that way. It started out when the Rhines were really doing this work in good faith. They weren't cheating. They were honest. Parapsychology started out as an honest to God try, but it's gone less and less naturalistic over the years, and that's why it's a pseudoscience, because its explanations violate the principles of naturalism that all of the other sciences have to stick to in order to keep their explanatory power. Right. Is that all? Yeah, that's it. Right. So next time, I want to keep with this theme, and I want to talk about mediumship, ghost hunting, and communication with the dead. We'll probably look at some bits from this chapter that we didn't look at today. You know, the psychical research stuff. We'll look at, we'll go back into the book and read a few sections of chapter 9, which will be really interesting. And I'll talk primarily about mediumship and communication with the dead, and then at the end, I'd like to have just sort of a free-form discussion on ghost hunting and pseudoscience. So that is it. That is all for today. So thank you, everyone. I hope you have a good weekend. And
thank you, you as well.
Yeah, and I'll see you.
Quick
all.
question about the quiz: Are you heavy on dates and like remembering numbers and stats?
Not really, no.
Okay.
But that's the kind of thing you can look up quickly. But no, okay. I'm more about key terms and concepts. It's important enough, like if you know that spiritualism was 19th century, psychical research was late 19th, early 20th, parapsychology was early, mid, late 20th,
1930s.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. That's good enough. I don't need to know the exact date the Rhines started their lab. That's not important. I need to know what the Rhines were doing, right? Not when they did it. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So no problem. All right, so I better return that phone call, and then for Daniel, who wanted to meet, I just have a quick call to make, and then I'll be on the Discord server. Otherwise, that is all. So bye, everyone. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you on Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thanks,
everyone. Take care.
You too.